Your life has a price, but for these 6 individuals, it proved to be less than the cost of a baseball cap or a golf ball. We're going to break down 6 cases where the instinct to save property became a death sentence. Never put trivial things above your own safety. Watch as a human loses to an inanimate object in the final clash. On the afternoon of March 14, 2013, the laws of physics were waiting patiently in the driveway of a private residence in Logan, Ohio. It was a Tuesday, defined by the stark, leafless silence of late winter in the Hocking Hills region. The air was cold, the ground was hard, and 62-year-old Edward Miller was engaged in the mundane maintenance of his property. He was a man comfortable with his surroundings, living in a quiet environment where risks seem minimal and controlled. The centerpiece of this tragedy was his vehicle, a 2004 Ford Explorer. To the human eye, it was just a mid-sized SUV, a tool for grocery runs and bad weather. But to the impartial universe, it was a dormant block of potential energy weighing approximately 4,500 pounds. That is over 2,000 kilograms of steel, reinforced glass, and engine block resting on 4 patches of rubber. The driveway where the vehicle sat was not perfectly level. It possessed a deceptive, gentle slope, a gradient steep enough to invite gravity, but shallow enough to be ignored by a busy mind. At some point during the afternoon, a critical lapse in procedure occurred. The details of the mechanical initiation are simple. The transmission was not secured in park, or perhaps the emergency brake was left disengaged while the engine idled, or the transmission sat in neutral. The specific error matters less than the physical result. The friction holding the 2.5-ton machine in place vanished. The vehicle began to roll. It did not surge forward like a predator. It crept backward, slowly, almost lazily, the tires crunching softly over the gravel. This slow speed is the most dangerous trap in the world of heavy machinery. This slow speed creates a dangerous optical illusion. When a human sees a massive object moving at walking pace, the brain instinctively categorizes it as manageable. We do not see a lethal threat. We see a minor annoyance. We see a potential dent in the bumper. We see an insurance claim. Edward Miller saw his truck drifting toward a large oak tree that lined the driveway. His reaction was instantaneous and purely instinctual. He did not calculate the kinetic energy. He only calculated the cost of the repair. He moved to intervene. This is a psychological reflex that kills thousands. The belief that biological will can override mechanical momentum. Edward ran behind the reversing vehicle. He positioned himself directly between the rear bumper of the drifting SUV and the immovable trunk of the ancient oak tree. He planted his feet firmly into the loose stones of the driveway. He placed his hands against the cold metal of the tailgate. He braced his shoulders. In his mind, he was a barrier. He believed that if he pushed hard enough, the machine would stop. For a fraction of a second, his muscles tensed, firing every available fiber to arrest the motion. He might have even felt the car slow down slightly, a tactile lie that gave him a surge of false hope. But the math was already finished. The Ford Explorer, even moving at less than 5 miles per hour, possessed a momentum that no human skeleton could withstand. Force equals mass times acceleration. The mass was absolute. The car was not attacking him. It was simply obeying the law of inertia. It required a counterforce of thousands of pounds to stop it, and Edward could only generate a fraction of that. The gap closed. The bumper made contact with his abdomen. The tree bark pressed against his spine. The reality of the situation set in instantly. The gravel beneath his boots offered no traction, and even if it had, his bones were not built to be hydraulic pistons. The SUV continued its backward path, indifferent to his presence. Edward was pinned. The sensation was not a sharp impact, but a relentless, crushing squeeze. The vehicle pushed him into the wood with the slow, inexorable power of a tectonic plate. The space he occupied was reduced to zero. In emergency medicine, this is known as traumatic asphyxia or compression injury. The chest cavity is compressed to the point where the lungs cannot expand. The diaphragm is immobilized. The pressure on the chest cavity became immense, restricting blood flow and overwhelming the cardiac system. It is a silent, terrifying containment. There was no explosion, no screeching of brakes, no cinematic crash. Just the groan of the suspension settling and the creak of the tree. The car came to a rest, using Edward's body as a soft wedge between the steel and the timber. He was trapped in a standing position, held upright by the very machine he tried to save. The silence of the Ohio countryside returned immediately. The engine might have still been running, or perhaps it had stalled, but the outcome was sealed. Rescue services would eventually arrive, but the timeline for survival in such a compression event is measured in minutes, sometimes seconds. The pressure compromised his internal systems before help could even be summoned. When the Hocking County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene, they found a tableau of tragic miscalculation. The car had to be carefully pulled away to recover him, but the physics had already claimed their due. Edward Miller died trying to prevent a scratch on a bumper. It is a harsh, cold lesson that the universe teaches without mercy. Never put your body between a hard object and a soft place. We are fragile organisms living in a world of heavy giants. When 4,500 pounds of steel decides to move, your only rational option is to let it go. Property is replaceable. The architecture of the human ribcage is not. On a bright, windswept afternoon in 2004, the jagged coastline of New South Wales, Australia, became the stage for a tragic lesson in the economics of survival. The setting was a high sandstone bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a place of breathtaking beauty where the golden rock meets the deep blue violence of the sea. Standing at the edge was a young man named Michael, a casual visitor absorbing the view on what seemed like a perfect holiday. He was dressed for the weather, wearing a standard baseball cap to shield his eyes from the harsh Australian sun. This cap was a mass-produced item, a simple assembly of cotton, stitching, and a plastic brim, likely purchased for no more than $10 at a gas station or a souvenir shop. It had no sentimental value, no historical significance, and certainly no structural importance. Yet in the next few minutes, this disposable object would become the most expensive item Michael ever owned. The atmospheric conditions on the coast are governed by thermal dynamics. The land heats up faster than the ocean, creating strong, unpredictable updrafts of air that scour the cliff faces. Without warning, a sudden gust of wind caught the brim of Michael's hat. It lifted the cap from his head and tossed it over the safety railing. In a straightforward scenario, the wind would have carried the hat out to sea, and Michael would have watched it sink, annoyed but safe. But the chaotic airflow played a cruel trick. The cap didn't fall into the ocean. It was caught by a turbulent eddy and deposited gently onto a small, scrubby bush, growing from a ledge just a few meters below the cliff edge. It sat there, tantalizingly close, fluttering in the breeze. This specific visual setup is a known psychological trap. When we lose something of value, even small value, our brain triggers a loss aversion response. We do not see the danger, we only see the task of retrieval. The cap was within reaching distance. To Michael, the equation seemed simple. Climb over, grab the fabric, climb back. It was a 10-second operation. He approached the galvanized steel fence. This barrier was not a suggestion. It was a definitive line drawn by civil engineers who understood the geology of the region. The ground Michael was standing on was Sydney sandstone. While it looks solid to the untrained eye, sandstone is essentially ancient beach sand compressed by time. It is sedimentary, porous, and notoriously unstable when exposed to the elements. The outer layers of these cliffs are often undercut by wind and salt spray, meaning the rock you see on top is actually a hanging shelf with nothing beneath it but air. It is a geological diving board waiting for a diver. Michael ignored the fence. He ignored the warning signs. He allowed the value of a $10 accessory to override his biological survival instinct. He vaulted the railing. He lowered his feet onto the ledge where the bush grew. He tested his weight. The rock felt deceptively solid under his feet, a tactile lie that gave him the confidence to commit fully. The friction held. The surface didn't crumble immediately. This false feedback loop gave him the confidence to commit fully. He leaned out. He stretched his arm toward the cap. His fingertips might have even grazed the cotton. But the physics of the cliff had a limit. The sandstone slab he was standing on had a sheer strength, the amount of force it could handle before snapping. Michael's weight, combined with the leverage of his leaning body, exceeded that limit. There was no dramatic rumble, no cinematic warning. The the rock simply surrendered. With a dry cracking sound, the ledge detached from the cliff face. In a fraction of a second, the solid ground turned into a cloud of dust and falling debris. Michael was no longer a man standing on a ledge. He was a falling object in a vacuum of gravity. The drop was approximately 40 meters. In the cold calculus of freefall, this distance takes roughly 3 seconds to traverse. 3 seconds is a horrifying amount of time for the conscious mind. It is long enough to realize that the plan has failed. It is long enough to understand that the hat was not worth it. As he accelerated, his velocity increased to nearly 90 kilometers per hour. The wind roared in his ears, a deafening reminder of the force he had underestimated. Below him, the rock platform at the base of the cliff waited with absolute rigidity. The human body is a marvel of biological engineering, capable of healing from cuts, fighting viruses, and repairing broken bones. But it has absolutely no defense against the sudden deceleration of a 4-story fall. The impact was instantaneous. The kinetic energy he had accumulated during the descent was discharged into his body in a single millisecond. The skeletal structure, designed to handle the stresses of running and jumping, was catastrophically compromised under the load. The internal organs were subjected to catastrophic displacement forces. The medical reality is that the trauma was non-survivable before his brain could even register the pain. It was a blunt, final conclusion to a complex life. Silence returned to the cliffside almost immediately. The ocean continued to crash against the rocks. The wind continued to blow. The fence stood firm, guarding the empty space where a man had stood moments before. And somewhere in the chaos of the fall, the $10 baseball cap likely drifted away, a worthless piece of cloth that had demanded the ultimate price. Michael's story is a stark, high-definition warning about the hidden calculations we make every day. We often treat our possessions as extensions of ourselves, willing to risk our safety to reclaim them. But the universe does not recognize ownership. It only recognizes mass, gravity, and the structural integrity of stone. A $10 hat is never worth the price of a human life. But in the heat of the moment, with the wind blowing and the object within reach, the illusion of control can blind us to the abyss, waiting just one step away. The sandstone cliffs of Australia remain beautiful and indifferent, a monument to the fact that the earth beneath our feet is not always as permanent as it seems, and that some lines once crossed offer no return. On the blistering afternoon of September 3, 2011, the vast interstate highway system of Texas was operating as a high-velocity river of steel and commerce. The asphalt shimmered under a relentless sun, creating thermal distortions that blurred the horizon and masked the true speed of the objects moving across it. In this unforgiving environment, 60-year-old Kevin Barnes was navigating the traffic, likely preoccupied with the routine of his journey, unaware that his vehicle was about to betray him. He was driving a truck equipped with a standard spare tire, a 40-kilogram Taurus of vulcanized rubber, reinforced steel belts, and compressed air. This object is designed as a passive safety device, a silent guardian against being stranded. However, due to a mechanical fatigue in the mounting bracket or a failure of the securing winch, the tire was liberated from its static position. It dropped onto the roadway while the vehicle was traveling at highway speeds of approximately 100 kilometers per hour. When a heavy, round object hits the pavement at this velocity, it does not simply slide to a halt. It engages with the surface. The friction bites into the asphalt, and the tire begins to rotate. This is the moment a piece of cargo transforms into an autonomous projectile. The physics at play here are deceptive. A rolling tire acts as a powerful gyroscope. The angular momentum generated by its rapid rotation creates a stabilizing force, allowing it to remain upright and track down the highway with eerie, ghost-like precision. To the human eye, this phenomenon looks almost comical. A rogue wheel bouncing happily along the median or the shoulder. It triggers a false sense of scale. We see a familiar object, something we have lifted in our garages, and we assume it is manageable. Kevin Barnes saw his property escaping. He reacted with the instinct of ownership, pulling his vehicle to the emergency lane to retrieve the wayward part. He stepped out of the safety of his cabin into the roar of the active highway. He saw the tire rolling toward him, or perhaps slowing down near the barrier. In his mind, he was about to catch a runaway basketball. He prepared his body to intercept it. He planted his feet. He extended his arms. He made a fatal calculation based on the appearance of the object rather than its energy. He was about to argue with one of the most potent forces in classical mechanics: rotational kinetic energy. A 40-kilogram mass moving at 100 kilometers per hour possesses a terrifying amount of linear momentum, enough to cause catastrophic internal injuries. But the tire had a second, hidden reservoir of violence. It was spinning at roughly 1,000 revolutions per minute. The tread was a blur of motion, storing energy like a tightly wound spring. When Kevin reached out to stop the wheel, he was not meeting a passive weight. He was stepping into the path of a grinding wheel the size of a man's torso. The moment of contact was an explosion of transfer energy. The tire did not stop. It transferred its momentum into Kevin's biological frame. The friction of the spinning rubber against his skin and bone was instantaneous and catastrophic. It acted as both a battering ram and a high-energy abrasive force. The force required to arrest that rotation is magnitudes higher than the tensile strength of human tendons or the structural integrity of the skeletal system. The impact threw him backward with the violence of a high-speed vehicle collision. The trauma was blunt, massive, and systemic. In forensic terms, the interaction caused catastrophic acceleration, deceleration injuries that the human body simply cannot absorb. The bouncing tire, which looked so harmless from a distance, struck with the authority of a cannonball. Kevin collapsed on the side of the road, his internal systems compromised by the sheer magnitude of the energy transfer. The tire, having shed only a fraction of its total momentum, likely continued to roll or tumbled away into the ditch, indifferent to the destruction it had caused. The traffic on the Texas interstate continued to flow, thousands of tons of steel rushing by, oblivious to the brutal physics lesson that had just concluded on the shoulder. Kevin Barnes died because of an optical illusion. The gyroscopic stability of the rolling tire masked its true power. It lured him into a sense of safety that was entirely false. We are accustomed to biological speeds, running, throwing, falling. We are not evolved to judge the momentum of industrial objects moving at mechanical velocities. A rolling tire is not a wheel. It is a missile that hasn't finished its flight path. The tragedy of that September day stands as a permanent, mathematical warning to anyone on the road. Never argue with an object that has mass, velocity, and rotation. In the court of physics, the verdict is rendered instantly and there is no appeal. On the humid afternoon of July 17, 2003, the manicured illusion of a private golf course in Florida concealed a lethal industrial machine. To the casual observer, a golf course is a sanctuary of leisure, a landscape of trimmed Bermuda grass and placid artificial lakes designed for relaxation. But to a civil engineer, these lakes are functional retention ponds, complex hydraulic systems connected by a network of submerged concrete arteries designed to manage the state's violent tropical rainfall. 50-year-old David was not thinking about civil engineering or fluid dynamics. He was a man driven by the thrill of the hunt, a ball hawk who found satisfaction in retrieving what others had carelessly lost. He was walking the edge of a water hazard, scanning the murky shallows for the dimpled white surface of lost golf balls. Each ball was worth perhaps $1, a trivial amount in the grand economic scheme, but for David, it was a game of accumulation. He spotted a target near a drainage culvert, a concrete pipe about 18 inches in diameter, partially submerged in the dark water. The ball was resting just inside the mouth of the tunnel, a simple sphere of rubber and plastic that had stopped rolling inches from the darkness. The atmosphere that afternoon was heavy, the air saturated with moisture, signaling the arrival of a characteristic Florida cloudburst. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the rain began to fall. Not as a drizzle, but as a sudden, torrential curtain of water. This is the moment the environment turned hostile. The rain poured into the retention ponds, raising the water level within minutes. When the water level in a pond rises, the pressure at the bottom increases, forcing water through the drainage pipes at a much higher velocity to equalize the levels between lakes. The sleepy lagoon was transforming into a high-pressure pump. David did not retreat. He saw the ball, and he saw the pipe. In his mind, the pipe was just a static hole in the ground. He did not understand the invisible monster waking up inside it. He waded into the waist-deep water. He reached his hand toward the culvert. He was chasing a $1 prize, unaware that he was interacting with one of the most terrifying forces in underwater physics. Delta P, or differential pressure, occurs when water flows from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. If there is no obstruction, the water flows smoothly. But if an object, or a person, blocks the flow, the pressure of the entire body of water concentrates on that blockage. It creates a suction force that is not actually suction, but the weight of the water pushing against the void. As David's arm entered the pipe to grab the ball, his body partially blocked the flow. The flow rate spiked. The water, desperate to escape the rising pond, grabbed him. In a fraction of a second, the gentle current became a hydraulic vice. He was pulled against the concrete opening. His torso acted as a plug, sealing the pipe. The math of this situation is horrifyingly simple. If the pipe is 18 inches wide and the pressure difference is just a few pounds per square inch, the total force holding him against the concrete can easily exceed 500 to 1,000 pounds. It was as if a grand piano had suddenly been dropped onto his chest, but the force was horizontal. David struggled. He planted his feet in the mud. He pulled with every ounce of hysterical strength his muscles could generate. But human muscles are biological levers. They cannot compete with the weight of 1,000,000 gallons of water obeying gravity. Once the seal is formed, the force required to break it is often greater than the structural integrity of the human body. To remove him, one would have to lift the entire lake. The rain intensified, pouring more energy into the system, increasing the pressure head, and tightening the grip of the vacuum. David was trapped in a concrete throat, held fast by the very water he was standing in. The silence of the underwater struggle was absolute. There were no screams, only the rushing sound of water squeezing past him and the immense load compressing his entire torso. The air in his lungs was compressed. The blood flow to his extremities was restricted. He was pinned to the drain like a moth in a vacuum cleaner, staring up at the distortion of the rain hitting the surface above him. It was a slow, terrifying realization that the physics of the situation offered no exit. There was no release button. There was no referee to stop the clock. The dollar ball, the object of his desire, had likely been sucked through the pipe long ago, leaving him to pay the bill. By the time emergency crews could manipulate the water levels and extract him, the biological timeline had expired. David drowned not in the open ocean, but in a landscape pond, anchored by an invisible force generated by a summer storm. His death is a grim, permanent entry in the ledger of diving accidents, a reminder of the Delta P rule. Once the flow grabs you, it does not let go until the pressure equalizes. We walk past these drains every day, seeing them as passive infrastructure, forgetting that with just a little rain, they become engines of immense power. David traded his life for a piece of plastic, caught in a trap he couldn't see, proving that in the battle between human desire and fluid dynamics, the water always wins. On the biting cold afternoon of November 12, 2008, the coastal waters of British Columbia were churning with the chaotic energy of an incoming Pacific Depression. The sky was a bruised charcoal, and the wind carried the distinct, metallic scent of snow and salt spray. In a small, weather-beaten marina, 44-year-old Derek was engaged in a battle against the elements to secure his property. His adversary was an 18-foot aluminum fishing boat, a vessel he had owned for over a decade. To the casual eye, an aluminum boat appears lightweight, a hollow shell of metal that floats buoyantly on the surface. This perception is a dangerous illusion. While the hull itself is relatively light, the water it displaces and the equipment it carries give it a functional mass of over 2,000 pounds. When that mass is agitated by a storm, it becomes a battering ram governed by the laws of hydrodynamics. Derek stood on the slippery wooden dock, fighting the erratic motion of the vessel as it tugged against its moorings. The wind was gusting to 40 knots, and the waves were slapping against the pilings with rhythmic violence. In his hands, Derek held a length of braided nylon rope, the lifeline connecting him to the boat. The rope was old, stiffened by salt and sun, but still possessed a tensile strength capable of towing a truck. As the boat surged away from the dock on a receding swell, the rope began to slip through Derek's wet gloves. He was losing his grip. In a moment of frustration and instinct, he made a decision that seasoned mariners warn against with almost religious fervor. To increase his leverage and stop the slide, Derek quickly wrapped the rope around his right hand and forearm. He created a loop. In his mind, this was a way to borrow mechanical advantage to stabilize the boat. He believed his skeletal structure and bicep strength were sufficient to counteract the drift of the vessel. He was wrong. He had just voluntarily attached himself to a dynamic system with infinite energy. Seconds later, a rogue wave, driven by the intensifying storm, surged into the marina. It struck the aluminum hull broadside. The boat didn't just drift, it was launched. The vessel accelerated away from the dock, riding the massive kinetic energy of the water. The slack in the rope vanished in a millisecond. The line snapped taut with the sound of a whip crack. The physics of a coiled rope are unforgiving. When a flexible line is wrapped around a cylinder, in this case a human arm, the friction increases exponentially. In this case, a human arm, the friction increases exponentially with every degree of rotation. It does not just hold, it binds. The loop tightened instantly, compressing the soft tissue and locking onto his forearm with the grip of a steel vise. The tension exceeded the friction of his boots on the wet wood. Derek was not just pulled, he was plucked from the dock. He was dragged over the edge and into the freezing black water. The temperature of the ocean was roughly 7 degrees Celsius. When a human body hits water this cold, the physiological reaction is immediate and debilitating. The victim gasps involuntarily, inhaling water, while the heart rate spikes. But Derek's primary problem was the boat. The vessel, now drifting rapidly in the current, acted as a relentless tugboat. Derek was the tow. He was pulled under the surface, tethered to a machine that had no lungs and felt no pain. He fought to free his hand, but the tension on the line made it impossible to introduce slack. The harder the boat pulled, the tighter the rope bit into his arm. It was a self-reinforcing mechanical shackle. The struggle took place in a chaotic wash of bubbles and darkness, just a few feet from the safety of the dock pilings. The buoyancy of his winter clothing fought against the downward drag of the rope, but the mass of the aluminum hull was the dominant variable. He was suspended in a fatal equilibrium, dragged through the icy depths by the inertia of his own possession. By the time the storm subsided and the boat was recovered, the physics had finished their grim work. Derek was found still attached to the line, a victim of a simple momentary lapse in protocol. The old rope, which had served him for years, had performed exactly as designed. It held fast under load. Derek's death is a somber, frozen lesson in the hierarchy of power at sea. A human being, no matter how strong, is never a match for the displacement of a hull or the energy of a wave. The ocean does not negotiate and it does not forgive. Never attach yourself to something you cannot control. In the brutal arithmetic of the sea, if you cannot let go, you are already gone. The aluminum boat bobbed in the silence of the aftermath, a hollow metal witness to the fact that in a tug-of-war with the ocean, the water always wins. On the oppressively hot evening of July 12, 2012, the underground nervous system of Chicago was functioning with its usual, brutal efficiency. The air in the Blue Line subway station was thick with the smell of hot steel, brake dust, and the city's collective exhalation. It was a subterranean world of concrete and dim fluorescent light, where thousands of people passed through daily, treating the environment as a simple, predictable corridor. To a regular commuter, the tracks below the platform are just a space where the trains run. They see two steel rails for the wheels and a third, slightly offset rail that looks like a structural component. This visual assumption is a lethal error in judgment. 22-year-old William Cassis was on the platform, waiting for a train. During a routine transaction, a single $20 bill slipped from his grasp. It did not fall at his feet. Instead, it was caught by the strange, piston-like gust of air that precedes a train's arrival and was deposited gently onto the gravel bed of the track below. It lay there, a small green rectangle of value against the grimy ballast, just a few feet away. This is a common urban dilemma, a test of risk versus reward. The human brain, evolved for a world of sticks and stones, performs a flawed calculation. It sees a short drop, it sees a quick retrieval, it sees $20, enough for a meal, a taxi ride, a small comfort. It does not see the 600 volts of direct current pulsing silently through the third rail. William made a decision based on this flawed visual data. He saw the money, and he saw a clear path to it. He waited for a lull in the station's activity, then lowered himself from the platform onto the track level. He landed on his feet in the trough, the concrete platform now at shoulder height. His world shrank to the immediate task: grab the bill and get out. The third rail of the Chicago L system is not a passive object. It is an uninsulated, always-on power line carrying a lethal electrical charge. It doesn't need to be touched directly to be deadly. Electricity is governed by a simple, absolute law. It will always seek the path of least resistance to ground. The human body, being composed of roughly 70% salt water, is an excellent conductor. When William moved toward the bill, his body entered the powerful electric field radiating from the third rail. He didn't have to touch it. He just had to get close enough for the voltage to overcome the insulating properties of the air. This is the phenomenon of an electric arc. The 600 volts ionized the humid air in the gap between the rail and William's body. For a fraction of a second, the air itself became a conductor, a bridge of superheated plasma. A brilliant blue-white arc erupted from the rail and made contact with him. The sound was a loud percussive crack, like a high-voltage whip. In that instant, William's body became the shortest circuit to ground. The full 600-volt potential of the rail surged through him. The current was not measured in milliamps, which are enough to stop the heart, but in hundreds of amps. The biological effect was instantaneous and absolute. The massive flow of electricity overwhelmed his nervous system, causing immediate cardiac arrest. The human heart, which operates on tiny electrical impulses, cannot function when subjected to an industrial-level current. Simultaneously, the immense energy caused a catastrophic internal thermal event, instantly compromising the body's cellular structure. The process was over in less time than it takes to blink. There was a flash of light, a brief silhouette against the arc, and then the smell of ozone filled the station. The people on the platform who witnessed it were left with a static, horrifying image. William lay motionless on the tracks, the electrical circuit now broken. A few feet away, the $20 bill remained undisturbed, its value reduced to zero. It was a worthless piece of paper that had served as bait for an invisible predator. Emergency services arrived to a scene where medical intervention was futile. The physics of the event had concluded long before they could descend to the tracks. The tragedy of William Cassis is a stark urban reminder that our modern world is threaded with invisible dangers that do not offer second chances. The third rail does not warn, it does not negotiate, and it delivers its full power without prejudice. It is a silent, patient hunter, waiting for a single miscalculation in the eternal and often tragic human calculus of risk versus reward. The family got an insurance payout, and the world got another cautionary tale from the coroner's report. Tell me, who in this lineup, in your opinion, died the most absurd death? Which of these cases strikes you as the most tragically preventable? Whose split-second decision is the hardest to comprehend? I'm waiting for the names in the comments. If you're here for the cold, uncensored truth, hit that like button and subscribe now. See you when the next rusty part picks its victim.